Okay, sorry. We'll be starting shortly in 2 minutes, so everyone can just slowly roll in, and we'll be ready to go at 7. Okay. Okay, so it's 7 o'clock, and we can begin.
Il est 7 heures, alors nous
So
pouvons
first of all,
débuter.
thank you for everyone for being here tonight. Today, our webinar is about learning about new and emerging treatments in IBD in Canada. So my name is Roshane Francis, and I'm the Manager of Research Grants, Impact Communication, and Evaluation at Crohn's and Colitis Canada, and I will be the moderator for tonight's event. So before we kick things off, I'd like to go over some technical details. So today, the webinar will be off. Dr. Battat and Sophie, our patient partner, will be speaking in French, but the webinar will be offered both in English and French. If you wish to access audio in French, at the bottom of your screen, there's a little globe icon. And if you click on the globe icon, you can choose your audio, which can either be English or French. And we also have 2 sets of slides being shared during the webinar. And in order to access this, right above the shared screen, there's a little button that says View Options. If you click View Options, you can then choose if you want to view English CCC staff screen, where we'll be sharing the English slides, or you can pick French CCC staff screen, where we will be sharing the French slides. So if you have any questions or issues accessing either the audio or the slides, please put it in the chat, and one of our staff members will help you help you access either the audio or the slides. Okay. So yes, I see some hands being raised. If you could just put the questions in the chat, that could one of our staff will help you answer those questions right away. Okay. Next, I'd like to acknowledge the rich history. Oh, sorry. Roshane, they're saying you're echoing. Sorry about that. Let me figure that out. I should not be echoing. Okay. Okay, I'm not sure why some folks are hearing an echo. Okay, it seems like the echo has been fixed. So hopefully things should be okay. So I will keep going. So back to the land acknowledgement. Next, I'd like to acknowledge the rich history and heritage of Canadian Indigenous people. While we meet today on a virtual platform, we recognize the importance of the lands which we call home. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation people that call this land home. Through this acknowledgement, we convey our deepest respects for the traditional territories of the Indigenous communities and contribute to the promotion of reconciliation. Next, I'd like to issue a really quick disclaimer. So the content shared in this presentation by Crohn's and Colitis Canada is solely for the purposes of education. While information holds general value, it may not be applicable for specific medical situations. Online resources should not be seen as a substitute for the personalized judgment and care provided by a trained healthcare professional. Crohn's and Colitis Canada does not endorse any external product or service mentioned during the webinar. For those of you joining us for the first time, I wanted to share Crohn's and Colitis Canada's promise with you. Our organization is dedicated to discovering a cure for Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. Through research, education, awareness, and advocacy, our organization strives to enhance the lives of everyone affected by these chronic conditions. Next, I wanted to share that CTC has launched an unmet needs survey, which is a survey to understand the experiences and challenges faced by individuals affected by IBD. So we use the data from the survey to help us develop new programming and to improve our current programming for next year. So if you have the opportunity to, please consider taking part in our unmet needs survey. Next, I wanted to share a program called Crohn's and Colitis Connect that CCC has developed and launched last year. So basically, Crohn's and Colitis Connect is an online community which offers an opportunity for everyone affected by IBD to engage with individuals within their community and to provide a safe space for sharing, as we mentioned, your challenges and experiences. If you're interested, please visit crohnsandcolitisconnect.ca, and there's also more information on our website. Okay, so now we get on to the main part of our webinar. But before we begin, I wanted to quickly launch a poll just to see where we all stand in terms of our understanding of new and emerging treatments in IBD. So I'm going to launch a poll. And essentially the question is, how would you rate your current knowledge on new and emerging therapies in IBD in Canada? So I'm going to leave it open for about 30 seconds, and I encourage everyone to take part in the poll. So about 70% of folks have answered. I'll wait a little bit more. Okay, so I will end the poll and I will share results. So essentially, it looks like there's a spread from about 1 to 7, 8, or 9. So it seems that there's a whole range of understanding of new and emerging treatments in IBD. And the hope is that by the end of this presentation, everyone moves towards the end of, so around 8 to 10. So we will try it. We'll see how it at the end of the presentation. Okay. So first, before we start with the portion led by Dr. Battat, I wanted to introduce our lived experience partner, Sophie, who will share about her specific lived experience related to our topic today. So briefly, I wanted to introduce Sophie. So she'll get into more details about her lived experience. But Sophie was diagnosed with Crohn's disease in 1992 and has undergone multiple surgeries, including colon resections and gallbladder removal. She is an active member of the Crohn's and Colitis community, and that's how I was introduced to Sophie when I was trying to find a patient partner for this talk. And when she shared her experiences with me, I realized that she would be a great addition to this presentation to share about how the actual lived experience of individuals managing their condition. Professionally, she is a business analyst and has a background in customer service. She is also a devoted mother and a very active individual who enjoys hiking, swimming, and reading. So now I will pass it on to Sophie to share her experience with us. Thank you again, Sophie.
Merci, Rochane.
J'aime toujours commencer, mes interventions ou mes présentations
Thanks,
par une
Roshan. I always
citation
like to start
et
my
celle que j'ai
presentations
choisie
with a
ce
quote.
soir,
And the
me
one I
parle plus
chose
spécifiquement
tonight
quand je considère mon
specifically
parcours
talks
avec la maladie
about
de Crohn.
my
Donc
journey
c'est
with
la
Crohn's
force ne vient pas
disease.
de ce qu'on peut faire,
Strength doesn't
elle
come
vient de
from what you
surmonter
can
les
do,
choses
it
qu'on
comes from
pensait ne pas
overcoming
pouvoir
things
supporter.
you thought you couldn't handle.
Next slide, please.
Next slide.
Donc mon parcours avec la maladie de Crohn,
So, my journey with Crohn's
était,
disease
assez hectique. Quand
was
j'étais
pretty
petite, je faisais
hectic.
partie d'une grosse
When I was
famille,
young, I
mais
was part of a bigger
parce que j'étais la
family.
quatrième de 5
And
enfants
I
et
was
que
the
les enfants
fourth
avant moi
out of
étaient très
five
turbulents,
kids, and the
je me suis
children
renfermée
before me
beaucoup sur
were
moi-même pour essayer de
very
pas faire de
dynamic and
vagues,
turbulent.
ce
I
qui
really
fait que je
closed in on
suis,
myself so I
devenue
wouldn't
très
take up too much
introvertie
space. So I've
et
become
puis,
very introverted.
j'avais beaucoup de problématiques
I
avec,
had a lot of issues
avec ma
with
digestion. J'étais
my
souvent malade.
digestion. I
Dans ce
was
temps-là,
often
on
sick,
ne parlait pas
but in
beaucoup de la
those
maladie
days,
de
we
Crohn.
didn't talk much about
J'ai
Crohn's
subi des
disease.
situations assez difficiles aussi dans ma
I've
vie, puis
experienced
celle qui
pretty
m'a
difficult
amenée
situations in my life as
vraiment
well.
à,
And
comme
the
on dit en bon
situation that
français, au
brought me
breaking
to
point,
really come to the
c'était mon
breaking
divorce en
point was
92.
my divorce in
À 91. En
1992.
92, je suis entrée à
In
l'hôpital.
91,
J'avais
sorry. In 92,
énormément de
I
problématiques
was admitted
avec
into the hospital. I had
mon système digestif.
tremendous
J'avais
issues with my
95%
digestive system.
de mon intestin qui était
90% of
en
my
inflammation, qui était en
intestines
état
was
inflammatoire.
inflamed, was in an
J'étais
inflammatory
vraiment pas très
state.
loin d'une
I was
péritonite, donc
really close to a
c'était urgent
peritoniite.
que
So
je
it
sois
was an
reçue en
emergency. I needed
consultation
to
en
be taken in
gastro-entérologie.
to a consultation in
Next slide, please.
gastroenterology. Next slide.
On a commencé le traitement habituel
So we've started
qu'on
the standard
associait
treatments
avec des maladies
associated
inflammatoires,
with
mais il n'y avait pas grand-chose qui se
inflammatory
passait de mon
diseases,
côté.
but not much
Euh,
was happening on my
on
end.
avait réussi à maintenir une
We were
stabilité,
able
mais
to
toute
maintain
l'inflammation
a
ne se
certain
résorbait
stability,
pas.
but the
Donc, on
inflammation
a
was
commencé
still
à
there.
parler de
So
traitements
we started talking about
exploratoires. Et
exploratory
dans ce temps-là,
treatments.
on m'a suggéré un traitement de
And
cyclosporine,
I was
qui
suggested
était
a
un traitement qu'on donne
cyclosporin
à des
treatment,
gens qui
which
reçoivent
is a
des greffes
treatment we give to people
pour
who receive
empêcher le rejet de la greffe. Dans ce temps-là, il y avait une étude qui était faite à l'effet que peut-être le système immunitaire
organ
rejette
donation. So
l'intestin
the
comme
people
étant
wouldn't
une partie
reject
malade du corps.
the organs. So at that moment, the
La
hypothesis was
cyclosporine
that
est un
my
médicament qui est
immune system wanted
extrêmement
to reject my
fort et qu'il fallait qu'il
intestine.
soit
So
monitoré
cyclosporin is a very
très
strong medication. It
surveillé
needs to be
très
monitored very
adéquatement,
closely.
là, si on peut dire, ou très proche. Donc, je suis revenue à la maison parce que le médicament
So
était très
I came
fort.
back home
J'avais
because
des
the medication
symptômes un
was so
peu
strong. I had
étranges de tremblement
bizarre
puis
symptoms,
de perte de
I was
cheveux.
trembling. I
Et
was
quelques
losing
mois
my
plus tard,
hair.
on m'a dit complètement en urgence d'arrêter de prendre la
And a few
cyclosporine.
months
J'avais des problèmes
later, they
avec
told
mon
me
foie.
in emergency to
Donc, on a
stop taking
continué juste
cyclosporin because I
sur
was
un
having issues
traitement de
with my
base qui était
liver. So
avec
I
le
started a
canjacet, qui est un
basic
aminosalicylate,
treatment,
et
a
la prednisone.
aminosalicylate, a
Et jusqu'en
bentasat, and I used a
98, mon état
prednisone as
est
well.
demeuré
And up
stable.
until 98, my
Prochaine diapo,
state
s'il
was
vous plaît.
stable. Next slide,
Next
please.
slide, please. Donc, en 98, il y a des troubles
So
connexes qui
in
sont
98,
apparus.
there were related problems
J'avais
that
des
appeared.
problématiques
I had
d'évacuation.
issues
J'avais mon intestin
with
qui
evacuating. My
commençait à être bloqué.
intestine was
J'ai
becoming
commencé à avoir
blocked
des abcès, des
and
fistules,
backed up. I
et on a
had
dû
some
m'opérer
fistula, some
pour
abscesses.
retirer
So
l'abcès et la
I
fistule et
had to
faire
go
une
under
première
surgery to
intervention au niveau de mon
take
gros
out the
intestin.
fistula and
Donc,
the
on a enlevé une
abscesses.
grosse
So we
partie
did
de
the
mon
first
gros
operation
intestin
to
qui
remove a
était
big
la
part of my
partie qui avait cicatrisé et en
intestine.
cicatrisant
So that is the
avait
part that
fermé
had
le
a
tube
scar.
digestif.
And with
Donc,
that
j'étais pas
scar, the
capable d'évacuer.
digestive tube
Et on a
was
rattaché le restant de
blocked up. So I was
l'intestin
not
à
able to
mon rectum.
evacuate. So we
Il y a d'autres
reattached the rest of my
interventions
intestine to my
qui sont
rectum.
survenues un petit peu plus
Other
tard aussi parce que
interventions
c'était
happened
pas
a
assez la
little
portion qui avait
later
été
as
enlevée.
well because the
Et
portion
donc,
that
j'ai
was taken
fini
out wasn't
avec
enough.
plus du tout de gros intestins.
And I finished
Et la
with no
résection
large
s'est
bowel
faite
at all.
entre mon petit intestin
And
et
the
mon rectum.
attachment was
On m'a
between
suggéré de
my smaller
commencer une
intestine and my
médication au
rectum.
purinétol
So
qui est un
I was
médicament
suggested to
immunosuppresseur.
use pyrinetal,
Mais je me suis toujours
which
intéressée
is
à qu'est-ce
an
qu'on proposait, donc j'avais
immunosuppressant
lu beaucoup sur le
medication.
sujet, puis
I was always interested
demandé
about
à mon médecin
the
si je
topic.
pouvais
I read
attendre avant de
a lot
commencer le
on the topic,
pyrinétol
and I
parce qu'il y
asked
avait des
my
risques de cancer qui
doctor
étaient
if I
associés à
could
la
wait
prise de ce
before using
médicament-là.
pyrinetal because there
On
were
a dit
cancer risks
d'accord, mais quand j'ai
associated
eu
with
ma
that
deuxième
medication. They
intervention
said yes,
pour
but
le
when I
gros
got my
intestin, j'ai
second
changé d'idée, puis j'ai dit, OK,
operation
je
for
vais
my large
commencer le pyrinétol. Je ne veux
intestine,
pas
I changed my
retomber
mind. I
malade
said, okay,
encore
I'm
puis
going to go back
devoir
on
subir
pyrinetal. I don't want to
d'autres
become
interventions
sick again and
chirurgicales.
have to go through the knife again, under the knife.
Therapies. En 2011, ça faisait 10 ans
So
que je
in
prenais du
2011,
pyrinétol, puis j'avais
it
lu
had
sur le
been
sujet que
10
si ça
years
faisait
I've
un
been
certain
taking
temps qu'on n'avait
pyrinetal,
pas
and
eu
I read
de
on this
retour ou de
topic
réattaque
if it
de la
had been a
maladie,
certain
qu'il
while
y avait de
before
fortes
we
chances
had
que ça
any
ne revienne
flares,
pas.
there
Alors, j'ai
were great
demandé si on pouvait
chances that it
arrêter le
would not come
pyrinétol.
back. So I asked
Après
if
des
I could
discussions avec mon
stop
gastro-entérologue,
pyrinetal, and
on a
after
décidé de
having
prendre le risque.
discussions with my
Et tout s'est
gastroenterologist, we
bien passé
decided to
jusqu'en
take the risk.
2016 où
Everything went
là,
well up until
mon examen
2016, where
coloscopique
my
a montré que
colonoscopy
j'avais une
showed
inflammation qui
the
recommençait
onset of
au
inflammation
niveau de la
again
cicatrice.
in
Donc, on m'a
the small
suggéré de
intestine where
commencer
there
un
was
nouveau
my
traitement à ce
scar.
moment-là, qui était
So
le
I was
traitement avec Humira.
it was
Mais ma
suggested that I start a
problématique,
new
parce que je
treatment,
suis très
Humira.
chanceuse,
And my
j'ai
issue,
commencé
my
à avoir des
problem, because I'm so
problématiques
lucky, I
d'effets
started
secondaires du
having
Humira. Je ne supportais
side
plus le
effects from
soleil,
Humira. So
ni
I
peu importe
couldn't
quelle
tolerate the
intervention ou
sun
quel
or
attouchement qu'on pouvait faire sur
any
ma peau.
touch
J'avais une
on my
réaction
skin. I had a
allergique. Donc,
reaction.
on
I
a
was
dû arrêter
allergic.
le Humira.
So we had to
Et
quit Humira.
mon gastro-entérologue m'a
And
suggéré
my
Encivio à ce moment-là
gastroenterologist
et m'a
suggested
dit, pour
NCVO at that
m'encourager,
time.
qu'il
So to encourage me,
fallait
he
absolument
told
que ça
me
fonctionne parce qu'il n'y avait pas autre chose
it
après.
absolutely had to work
Alors,
because there was nothing
je me
else
suis croisé
after
les
that.
doigts,
So
puis
I crossed my
Entivio a
fingers.
fonctionné pour moi
NCVO, it worked.
depuis 2018 jusqu'en
So since
2025.
2018 up
Là,
to
je me suis rendu
2025.
compte en 2025 que
And
je
I
n'avais
realized
plus
in 2025
des
that I
veines
no
assez
longer
fortes pour
had
supporter
strong
des injections
veins,
intraveineuses
and
à
I
toutes
could
les
no longer
6 ou 8
support
semaines. Donc,
intravenous
j'ai demandé
injections
s'il y avait
every
un
6
traitement
to 8
différent, puis
weeks.
on m'a
So
suggéré
I
l'Entivio
asked for
sous-cutané
a
que
different
j'ai
treatment.
commencé il n'y a
So
pas
I
très
was
longtemps.
suggested the
Depuis que je suis sur Entivio, là, tout va bien en ce qui me
subcutaneous
concerne.
NTVO.
Je n'ai plus de
Everything has been
problématiques
fine. I
associées à
don't have any other
des
issues
inflammations ou des
associated
douleurs
to
abdominales. Alors, je
inflammation
me
or
croise les doigts
abdominal
que ça
pain.
continue
So
comme ça.
I'm crossing my fingers, hoping it's going to
Ce que j'ai retenu dans mon
continue
parcours,
this
puis que
way.
je
So what
voulais
I
partager avec
remember,
vous,
what's
next
my
slide, please,
takeaway from this journey and what I want to
c'est
share
que
with you?
il y a des choses à retenir dans toute cette
There are
expérience-là que j'ai
takeaways
vécue.
from this whole
Apprendre à
experience I
communiquer
went through.
pour sortir
Learn how to
l'anxiété, pour sortir les choses
communicate
que
to
je
get the
gardais à l'intérieur de moi qui
anxiety
pouvaient
out,
me
to
causer
get
du
all of these
stress.
emotions that I kept
Ne
inside of
jamais
me
baisser
that
les
could
bras
cause
parce
some
que c'est pas parce
stress.
qu'un traitement ne fonctionne pas
Never
que le
give up.
prochain ne
It's not
fonctionnera
because a
pas.
treatment
Puis même
doesn't
si on a
work
des
that the next
difficultés
one
à passer à
won't work.
travers
And even
la
if we have
maladie,
trouble
il y
going
a toujours
through
une lueur
the
d'espoir, il y a toujours
disease,
des
there is
recherches qui se font,
always
puis il y a
a
toujours
light
quelque
at the end of
chose
the
qui
tunnel. There
va
is always
nous permettre
ongoing
d'aller de l'avant
research
puis
and
de
something
continuer.
that is going to help
Donc,
us move
j'ai décidé de
forward.
continuer à regarder vers
So I
l'avenir, de
decided to
continuer à faire des
continue to
projets de
look
vie,
forward
puis de
towards the
m'offrir
future,
des
to
moments à
continue
moi, des moments qui vont me permettre de me
creating
ressourcer
projects for
moi, puis
myself and
de
having
me
moments to myself
grounder,
so
comme on
I
dit en
can
bon
ground
québécois, pour
myself.
éviter de me générer des
So to
sources de
avoid
stress qui pourraient faire
generating
en sorte que
stressful
la
situations that could
maladie
make
revienne
the
par une attaque.
disease flare up
Alors, c'est ce que
again.
je voulais partager avec vous ce
So
soir. Je ne
that's
sais
what
pas
I
si
wanted
vous
to
avez des
share with
questions pour
you
moi.
tonight. I don't know if you have any questions for me.
Sinon, je vous souhaite une bonne écoute
If
avec ce que le
not,
docteur Battat peut nous
I
partager.
hope you have a good presentation with Dr. Battat.
Thanks, Sophie, for sharing your. Let me turn on my camera. Thanks, Sophie, for sharing your experience. I will be honest, I missed a few of that, but I did have a chance to read through your slides and your story. So thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. And we hope that everyone who heard your story, and we'll usually see feedback from everyone attended of how inspiring and helpful it was to hear your story tonight. Okay, so there is a question in the chat for you, Sophie, but we can take care of it during the Q&A session. So now we'll move on to the second part of our of the webinar. and which is led by Dr. Robert Battat. So very briefly, let me introduce Dr. Robert Battat. Dr. Battat is an attending physician and scientist at CHUM in Montreal, and he serves as the director for the Center of Clinical Excellence and Translational Research in Inflammatory Bowel Disease. He has completed his medical training and further specialization in IBD at McGill University, followed by advanced clinical and research training in IBD at UC San Diego and at Alimentiv. Dr. Battat's research focuses on cutting-edge multi-omics approaches to better understand how environmental and biological factors influence treatment response and recovery in high-risk patients. He has published extensively in leading journals and has contributed to the development of the International European Crohn's and Colitis guidelines. So we're very lucky today to have Dr. Battat leading the session, and please, Dr. Battat, take it away. I'm also going to ask our staff to provide Dr. Battat with slide control for the French slides. Thank you, Dr. Battat.
Shane. Alors, bonjour tout le monde.
Okay, so hi everyone.
Ouais. Alors aujourd'hui, je vais parler des nouveaux traitements dans les maladies
Today, I will
inflammatoires
be
de
talking
l'intestin.
about new and emerging
Je voulais
therapies
juste
for
dire que
IBD.
l'histoire que Sophie vient de
I just want to say that Sophie's story is a story that
qu'on voit souvent.
we
Et
often
c'est
see.
pour ça que je pense qu'on a beaucoup de chance
That's why I
qu'en
think we're very
2025,
lucky that
il y a
in
beaucoup plus
2025,
des options
we have
qu'en
many more options,
1990.
a lot more than in the 90s, in
En
1990.
fait, je pense de plus en plus, on va en avoir plus.
And I think we'll have more and more options as we move forward.
Ce sont mes conflits. Alors, ça, c'est le paysage thérapeutique en 2025.
So this is the
Bref, la plupart des
therapeutic
médicaments
overview
sont
in
approuvés
2025. So
pour
most
les deux
medications
maladies,
are
maladie de
approved
Crohn
for
et
both
colitis
diseases,
ulcéreuse.
the Crohn's disease and
Il y a
ulcerative
maintenant
colitis.
à peu près 5 ou 6 classes. Ça
Now
veut dire
there
une
are
classe veut
5
dire
or
le
6,
façon
7
que le
classes.
médicament
So the
fonctionne.
class is
Mais il y en
how
a
the
des fois plusieurs
medication works,
médicaments
what
qui
its
fonctionnent avec
mechanism
un
of
mécanisme similaire.
action, but
Alors,
sometimes there are many functions
il
with
y a des
similar
médicaments
mechanisms.
comme infliximab.
So
À
there are
l'époque, le
medications
nom
like
était Remicade.
infliximab. At the time, the name was
Adalimumab, le
Remicade.
nom était Humira. Alors, le premier
Adalimumab, the name was
traitement avancé
Humira.
avec
So
une
the
haute
first
efficacité
advanced
était
treatment with
approuvé
high
en
efficiency was approved in
1998. Ça,
1998.
c'était le Remicade, le infliximab.
So
Et puis
the
ensuite,
Remicade,
adalimumab a été
infliximab,
approuvé
and then the
10 ans
adalimumab
plus
was
tard.
approved 10
Le
years later.
vedolizumab, et ces deux
The
molécules
vedolizumab,
bloquent
both molecules here block
une cytokine. Alors,
a
une cytokine, c'est quelque chose qui
cytokine.
est
A
produit par les
cytokine is something
globules
that is
blancs
produced
qui attaquent
by the white
les
cells,
choses qui
the
causent des
immune
infections comme des
system cells.
bactéries ou des
Then they attack
virus.
things
Mais
that
dans ce
cause
cas-là,
inflammation,
dans le
like
corps des patients
bacteria and
avec maladie
viruses. But in the
inflammatoire,
case
ces
with
cytokines
patients
attaquent
affected
les
by
intestins, le
inflammatory
tube digestif.
disease,
Alors,
the
ça
cytokines
bloque
actually
ce
attack
cytokine
the
et ça
intestine
aide
cells.
avec la maladie
So
inflammatoire.
the
Et il y
vedolizumab
a
blocks that
aussi des
cytokine
très
and it
faibles
helps
risques des
with
infections
inflammatory
avec
diseases,
cette
and there are
classe-là.
very
En
low risks of
2013, il y a
infections
eu
with
une
those
autre
medications.
molécule qui
In
s'appelait
2013,
le
another
vedolizumab. Ça,
molecule
c'était le
named
Entyvio que Sophie prend.
vedolizumab, the
Et ça, c'est
Entyvio
un
that
médicament
Sophie
qui
is
bloque
taking, and that medication
les
blocks
globules blancs de attaquer
white cells from
les intestins.
attacking
Mais en
intestines,
fait, les globules
but
blancs
the
fonctionnent
white
ailleurs.
cells
Alors, ça bloque
can work
le globule
in
blanc pour
other
attacher aux
places.
intestins,
So
mais en fait, il
it
peut
blocks the
fonctionner
white
bien
cell
dans tout le
from
reste du
attaching
corps.
to the
Alors, ces
intestine,
patients-là
but it
ne
doesn't
sont
block it
pas,
from
qui prennent ce
going about
médicament-là,
its other
ne
work
sont
in the
pas
body. So
immunosupprimés.
people that use this medication are
Après
not
ça, en
immunosuppressed.
2017-2018, le
Then in
ustekinumab ou le
2017,
Stelara a été approuvé
2018,
et
the
ça bloque deux voies
ustekinumab
inflammatoires,
or the
une
Stelara was approved. So it has two inflammatory pathways, the interleukin, which is a cytokine again causing inflammation. So it will block the inflammatory pathway of this lutein, and it worked for Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis as well. We thought it would cause immunosuppression, but now we know that it blocks atypical or abnormal cells, but the effect of that medication does not reduce the natural function of normal white cells. So we don't really see any infections related to the sclera or the ustekinumab.
Ensuite, ils ont même mieux ciblé un des deux cytokines qui s'appelle
And they were better
IL-23.
able to
Alors, c'est
target
comme
one
un
of the two
des voies
cytokines, the
inflammatoires que le
IL-23.
Stelara
So the
bloque.
ustekinumab had
Il
two
ciblait
pathways,
seulement
IL-12 and
voie
IL-23,
inflammatoire et pas
but now they
deux
were
voies
able to
inflammatoires en même
target
temps.
only
Ils
one
ont vu qu'en
inflammatory
fait,
pathway.
l'efficacité est même
So they
mieux.
realized that the
Alors, il y en a
efficiency is even
3 qui
better
sont
like
sur
that.
le marché
So there
maintenant.
are
Le risankizumab
3
qui
on the market
s'appelle,
right now. We
qui
have
est
the
nommé
risankizumab, which is
Skyrizi.
called
Il y a le
Skyrizi.
guselkumab qui
We have the
s'appelle
guselkumab,
le
which
Tremfya.
is
Et
the
il y a le
Tremfya,
mirikizumab qui
and
est
the
le Envo, qui
mirikizumab, who
fonctionnent
is
de
the
le même
Envo.
mécanisme.
They all work with the
Quelques-uns
same
sont
mechanism.
subcutanés.
Some are
Bon, ils sont tous
subcutaneous.
intraveineux et ensuite
They're
subcutanés.
all
Mais
intravenous, and then they can
le
be
fréquence des doses sont un
subcutaneous.
peu différents.
But the
Même
dose
chose, on voit pas
frequency
des
is a little
infections
different.
ni des cancers avec
Same
ce
here, we
classe-là.
don't see any
Et ensuite, il
inflammation
y
or
en a deux
infections with
classes qui
these ones.
sont orales. Ça
Then
veut
we
dire
have two
que c'est
oral
juste un
classes.
comprimé
That
par
means that
jour.
it's only one pill per
Et le
day.
Rinvoq ou le upadacitinib est le
The
médicament qui est
upadacitinib,
fort
the
comme
Urinvo
l'infliximab,
is a
avec
strong
des risques qui
medication
sont assez
like
similaires
the
que l'infliximab, mais
infliximab with
c'est
the
un
similar risk of
médicament oral.
infliximab, but it's a oral
Et
medication.
dernièrement, il y a les S1P. Ça, c'est une classe qui
And
bloque
not long
les
ago, we've
globules
got
blancs de
the
sortir des ganglions,
SMP, which
mais pas
blocks
complètement. Ça
the
juste
white
réduit
blood
un
cells
peu.
to come
Et
out
en
of the
fait, ça
glands.
fonctionne dans la
It
colite ulcéreuse.
just reduces a little bit their excretion, and it works in
Alors
ulcerative
ça, c'est juste un
colitis.
survol de tous les
So
mécanismes.
this is just
Mais
an
bref,
overview of
ça
all the
décrit
mechanisms
exactement
and
ce que je viens
pathways, but
de
it exactly
décrire.
describes what I've just explained.
Alors, quand je pense de efficacité,
So when
les
I think
couleurs
about
sont un peu
efficiency,
faibles ici, mais
the colors
bref,
are not
dans la maladie de
too
Crohn, on pense
strong
que
here, but
le
in
infliximab
Crohn's
qui a
disease, we
été
think that
approuvé dans
infliximab,
l'année de presque
that was
2000,
approved in the
et
2000s,
le Rinvoq qui est plus récent,
and the Rinvo that
ce
is more
sont
recent.
probablement les plus forts.
They are
Et
the
ensuite, on voit que
strongest
les IL-23
medications,
comme le
but we
Tremfya,
see that
le
the
Skyrizi et le Envo
IL-23,
fonctionnent
like
très bien
the
aussi. Un
Tremfya,
peu
the
moins
Skyrizi,
sont
they work
le
very well
ustekinumab
too.
et le adalimumab, le
A
Humira et
little
le
less
Stelara.
than
Et
the
puis, dernièrement,
ustekinumab
il y a
and
le
the
Entyvio. Je veux
adalimumab,
dire,
and
ça, c'est
the
mon échelle basée
now
sur des essais
we
cliniques
have the
randomisés. Et ça ne veut pas dire que si tu
vedolizumab.
prends
So
un de
these
ces
are based on
médicaments-là,
randomized
que ça ne
trials. It
fonctionne
doesn't
pas.
mean
Les
that if you
médicaments,
take one
toute
of these
notre
medications,
biologie
it's
sont
not going to work.
différents. Et
All
il y en a des
biologies
patients,
are
et on
different,
voit
and
avec
some
Sophie,
patients,
que
as we can see with
l'Entyvio
Sophie,
fonctionne très bien
the
pour ces patients-là.
Lentivio
Alors, c'est
works
pas
really well
que
for those
ça, on
patients.
parle de
So
la moyenne sur
we're
des
talking about an
populations
average
des
here
centaines de
on the
patients.
population of 100 and hundreds of
Quand on parle de
patients.
colite ulcéreuse,
So when
il
we
y a
talk
aussi
about
le même médicament qui sont
ulcerative colitis, there
forts.
is
Bref,
also
il y a les
medication
mêmes
that is
classes,
strong.
l'infliximab
We
et
have
le
the same
Rinvoq,
classes,
et
the
puis le
infliximab, the
guselkumab et
Urinvo, and
l'Entyvio
the
sont les plus forts.
guselkumab and the Entyvio are the strongest.
Alors, moi, comme médecin, comment est-ce que
So as
je
a doctor,
juge que ce
how do
médicament est plus
I
fort, plus
judge
plus
if a
faible?
medication is
Alors,
stronger or
quand on regarde
weaker?
les données d'un essai clinique qui a été
So when we
publié,
look at
une
the
chose qu'on veut
data
voir,
of
c'est
a
dans un
clinical
groupe qui a
trial that
reçu
was
un
published, one
placebo
thing that we want to
versus
know
un
is in
groupe
the
qui a reçu le
placebo
drug.
group
C'est sûr
versus
que si
the
la
group that
différence est
received the drug.
10%, comme
Of course, if
10%,
the difference
comme les
is
patients qui ont reçu une drogue
more than
ont
10%, so
10% plus
the
que le
patients that
taux est
received the drug
10% plus qui ont obtenu une rémission. Ça, c'est une
went
petite différence versus
into
placebo. Si la
remission
différence est
at a
80%
10%
versus
more, that is a
placebo, on sait
small
que premièrement,
difference.
il y a
But
un
if the
large
difference
effet
is
et c'est plus
80% versus the
généralisable
placebo
à
group,
tous les
we
patients,
see that
quel que
it's
soit ce
a
médicament-là.
bigger
L'autre
effect
chose,
and it's more
c'est
generalized
le
to all
population de patients.
patients.
Alors, s'il y
Another
a
thing
une
is
drogue qui
the
fonctionne chez des
patient
patients qui ont
population. So
échoué
if a
tout,
drug
alors
works
plusieurs
for a
échecs aux
patient
médicaments, qui ont
who
eu
encountered
une sévérité qui est très sévère, qui ont beaucoup des fistules,
many
sténoses, qui ont eu
obstacles,
besoin de
it
plusieurs
didn't work with
chirurgies.
other drugs, and they
Euh,
had a lot of
euh,
surgeries.
Excuse-moi, on va juste muter le... Je pense que quelqu'un
I'm
n'est pas
sorry,
sur mute.
I think someone is not on
Et,
mute. Please mute your
et
microphones.
bref, ce sont les critères que moi je juge
So those are the
pour
criteria that
évaluer
I
si un
take to
médicament est
judge
efficace.
and
Alors, on
evaluate
peut
if a
voir
drug is
ici
efficient.
avec le
So here
upadacitinib,
you
alors
can
c'est
see
le
with the
Rinvoq,
upadacitinib, the
que
Rinvoq,
même chez des patients
that
qui ont eu
even
un
where
échec
patients failed with
des agents
other
biologiques, on voit que
biological
le
agents,
médicament
you
est
can see
toujours
here that the
efficace.
medication is still efficient,
Même
or the
chose
drug is
pour
still efficient.
le
Same
guselkumab. Alors
thing
ça, c'est le
for the
Tremfya qui est nouveau sur le
guselkumab, but this
marché
is the
maintenant. Mais
Trenviad,
on
which is
voit
new on the
que
market
ça
now.
fonctionne très bien. On voit
But
le
we can see that it works
bio-naïf
very well.
ici,
We
mais on
see
voit les
the
bio-IR. Ça veut dire
bio
que les
naive,
patients qui
but
ont
we also
reçu des
bio
agents
naive, and we
biologiques,
have the
et on
bio
voit que
IR.
ça
So those
fonctionne
are patients that
malgré le
got the
fait qu'ils
biological
ont
agent. But
déjà
we can see that
échoué
it
un
works
agent biologique.
even if they have already failed with a biological agent before.
Et ça, c'est le longue durée. À
So this
44
is on
semaines,
the
et on
long
voit la même
term. At
chose.
week 44, we can see the same results.
Il y a des autres outils qu'on utilise,
We use other
comme
tools as well.
c'est une type d'étude qui s'appelle une
This is a type of
méta-analyse
a
de
study that
réseau,
is
en
called
réseau
a
ou une network
network
meta-analysis. Mais
meta-analysis.
bref, on regarde la différence
So
entre
we
drogue
look
et
at the
placebo dans
difference
chaque
between
essai
the drug
clinique,
and the
et puis
placebo in
on fait une
each clinical
comparaison entre les
trial,
drogues,
and we
et on voit les
compare the
mêmes
drugs,
conclusions que je
and
viens de
we
vous dire.
see the same
Alors, il y a,
conclusion that I
bref,
just
les
told
anti-TNF,
you.
le infliximab,
So there are
les
the anti-TNFs,
IL-23
the
et les JAK,
Zfleximab, the
comme
EL23, and JAKs
upadacitinib. Alors,
are
infliximab,
the different drugs.
Tremfya,
So Fleximab,
risankizumab,
Shventria,
Skyrizi et Rinvoq,
Rizamflizumab,
qui sont
Skyrizi,
les plus
et
forts.
Rinvoq
Mais ça ne veut pas
that are
dire
the
que les autres ne
strongest.
fonctionnent pas. C'est juste que c'est plus
Doesn't mean that
généralisable
the
à
others
tout le monde.
don't work. It's just that it's easier to generalize in the population that it will work.
On a aussi maintenant en
We now
2025 des
have in
comparaisons
2025
directes.
comparisons,
Alors,
direct comparisons.
on a
So
discuté pourquoi est-ce
we've
qu'on a ces
discussed
nouveaux
why
molécules
we
comme
have
le
these new
Skyrizi
molecules
ou
like
le Tremfya parce
Skyrizi
qu'ils
or
ont fait
Temperantia
des
because
études. Alors, ça
they've
cible
done
juste un
studies
des
and it
deux
just
voies
cites one
inflammatoires
of
que
the two
le
inflammatory,
Stelara cible ou
Stelara,
le ustekinumab cible.
used to
Mais en fait, quand ils ont
Muskinimab,
fait une essai
but
clinique où ils ont
we did a
comparé
clinical
les deux
trial. They
drogues,
compared both
le
drugs,
vert c'est le
and the
Skyrizi et
green
le
is
bleu c'est le
Skyrizi and the
Stelara,
blue is
on
Stelara.
voit que
We
la taux de
see
rémission
that
c'était
the
plus
rate of
haut
remission
avec le
was
Skyrizi
higher
en
with the
comparaison
Skyrizi in
avec le
comparison
ustekinumab.
with the ustekinumab.
Et on voit la même
And
chose
we
avec
see
le
the same
Tremfya ou le
thing with
guselkumab,
Tremfya
que
or
c'est plus
glycimab
efficace
that is
que
more
le
efficient
ustekinumab dans
than
la maladie
ustekinumab
de Crohn.
than in the Crohn's disease.
À l'inverse, on voit que en fait,
Inversely,
en
we
colitis
see
ulcéreuse, le
that in
Entyvio, le
ulcerative colitis in
bevacizumab,
TiVo
et en fait était plus efficace
was more
que
efficient
l'adalimumab. Alors ça,
than
c'est le Humira.
adalimumab, so
Alors,
Humira.
il y en a des
So there
médicaments qui
are
fonctionnent mieux pour
medications
le
that
Crohn,
work
il y en a
better
d'autres qui fonctionnent
and
mieux pour la
others that
colitis
work
ulcéreuse.
more for ulcerative colitis.
Mais on ne considère pas
But we
seulement
don't consider
l'efficacité parce
only
que
the
l'être humain
efficiency because the
c'est
human
comme juste pas si un patient répond aux drogues, oui ou non.
it doesn't
Il y a
know if a
le
patient will respond
sécurité
or
ou
not. Those are the
l'innocuité des
security or
drogues.
inocuity of the drugs as well.
Et ça, c'est mon
And
hiérarchie des
that
médicaments.
is
Mais
a
bref, on
hierarchy of
pense
the
que le
medication, but we think
Entyvio
the
et le
Entyvio and
Stelara ou
the
le
Stelara
ustekinumab
or
sont les plus
ustekinumab is
sécuritaires.
more
Et tous
secure
les
and safe. So
IL-23
are the
comme le
EL23Is
Tremfya,
like
comme le
Tremfya,
Skyrizi, comme le Envo
Skyrizi, Umvo
sont
are
probablement le même
probably
innocuité
the
comme
same
très
inocuity
sécuritaire,
that are very
mais
safe.
on n'a pas les
However,
mêmes
we
durées des
don't have the
données qu'on
same
a pour le
duration of
Entyvio ou
data as for
l'ustekinumab, et c'est pour ça que
Entyvio
je le
and
baisse un peu
ustekinumab,
dans
and
mon
that's why
hiérarchie.
it goes lower in
J'ai
my
mis les
hierarchy. hierarchy. So I put the antagonist in TNF and upadacitinib low. Does not mean that they're dangerous, not at all, but there are risks that are measurable, that are more than the general population, but there are percentages that are very, very low. So there's also a new approach. So we're talking about new therapies, but this is a new strategy that will probably be, if I must guess, it will be the standard in 10 years. And to combine different therapies together. We know that in AIDS, at the first of the AIDS treatment, we treated, or HIV, we treated the HIV and it did not function. And the virus will have mutations and will evolve to cause other problems. And so same thing we think for the immune cells, and for that reason, if we block via 2 inflammation points, possibly it could, let's say, kill the immunitary cells and heal. And so we were doing that with atezolizumab, infliximab, and we would see that it was functioning better than only one of the medication and monotherapy. But the problem is that every one of them, of these different treatments, have risks inherent to themselves. Risk of infection, infliximab as well, and even a risk of lymphoma. So they're very weak, but the risks of lymphomas are still there. And that is what we see here. The combination therapy in ulcerative colitis increased the risk of lymphomas when you combine the two. But every one, particularly of these medications, azathioprine, had a risk. But we can see the rates are always the same, even if it's a bit higher than the general population. These are numbers that are quite weak. And so we said, okay, so if we did that with 2 biological medications together that are known, if we have a medication that are more safer, or azathioprine, can we use them in combination to have a combination that is more favorable on the safety side? And so we published on this in 2020, and afterwards there were more globally in Europe, United States, that published on this as well. And we did the key findings resume, but for patients that have a problem between 2 and 3 different failures per treatment, the rate of remission, symptomatic remission, was almost 60%. And usually for drugs, individual drugs, we see rates like 25 to 30% for patients with many different failures. But for the combinations, we saw that almost a double that. For the secondary results or serious adverse events, that number of 7% is actually something that we see. That is the number that we see with infliximab monotherapy. So we did not see signals that are higher than the individual treatments themselves, and that is based on bodies in the real world and not just clinical trials that are randomized. Now we do have clinical trials randomized where they combined golimumab, like infliximab, with guselekimab, the Tremfya, which is already on the market. And what they've seen actually was that the combination, so the blue is the combination, was better than every individual treatment itself. So we see now that even a remission on biopsy, we see that it's more than double when you combine the therapies than if you were on a monotherapy treatment alone. And so let's talk about the new therapies now. So this is a new strategy. We just spoke about combining treatments. We just finished the clinical trial, which is called a duet. We did it at the CHUM, where they combined lusarcimab and golumab. It was like two medications that were given at the same time. Now the companies, rather than giving two medications at the same time, they start producing medication that block both passages with one therapy. That is, if it does work, it could be an option that is very interesting and possibly even the future of the treatment of inflammatory diseases. There are other strategies as well. That's another trial that is underway at the CHUM. This is the study Victriva, where we are using Entyvio, and all the patients that receive Entyvio, but one branch of the study receives Entyvio with upadacitinib, Rinvoq, and for only 12 weeks. So the idea is if we give two medications at the same time for 12 weeks, we're extinguishing the fire, and then we continue for 1 year on only Entyvio, viuatlimab, to have a treatment that is more secure, safer on the long term, and not to bring the risks associated with the Rinvoq to the patient on the long term. Another new class of treatment that I think will be on the market in 2029, if the clinical trials are positive, are the bad translation here probably, but the TNF, like lichen 1A, and it's a TL1A. And the TL1A is master regulator of many different passages of inflammation that act on different composites of the immune system. But one thing in the laboratories of the tests and laboratory tests, we did not see that in humans yet. And it acts on the cells that cause fibrosis or stenosis. And so in theory, it could help with the patients with the stenosis that block the intestines. But that's only in theory, and we do need to see that in real life if this happens. And with this class, all the companies are trying to do a blood test and diagnosis will accompany these studies. And these are blood tests to predict if this drug will work for this human being. And so this is tulisokibart, that is a product that Merck bought for almost $12 million a few years ago. But it is a medication that works very well in the colitis, ulcerative colitis, and in phase 2. And now we are testing this in the clinical trials, phase 3. And when the study phase 3 is completed, and if the results are positive, the plan will be to submit it to be approved by the FDA in Health Canada. Another molecule, TL1A, it is a product that Teva and Sanofi, and this is a duvakitug, but even same idea, that it functions with the same mechanism that TL1, and it worked very well in the sickness of Crohn's. But we do need to have more data of all these molecules are available or will be available in the next few months,
Mais
the
bref,
CHUM.
c'est une option intéressante
So it is an
qui, je
interesting
pense, va
option,
être sur le
and I
marché
think it will be on the market
peut-être un peu plus tard
possibly a bit
après
later
le tulisokibart.
after tulisokibart.
On a discuté le
We also
Stellara,
discussed
on a
about
discuté
Stellara,
le
we spoke
Tremfya,
about
le
Tremfya,
Envo, le
Amvo,
Skyrizi. Ce
Skyrizi.
sont des médicaments qui
These are
bloquent le
medications that
IL-23.
block the
Qui sont des
EL23,
médicaments qui
and those
sont
are medications
intraveineux
that
et puis
are
ensuite subcutanés, alors
intravenous
des
and
aiguilles.
subcutaneous through
Mais ils
needles,
ont développé
but they've
une autre
developed
façon de bloquer
another
ce voie
way of
inflammatoire,
blocking that
de bloquer le
inflammatory way
récepteur.
and
Et
blocking
en
the
fait, c'est
receptor.
une
And
peptide
so it is a peptide,
orale. Alors,
an
c'est une
oral peptide.
comprimée
So it is a
une
pill
fois par jour.
once per
Et
day.
le comprimé
And
bloque le
this
même
pill blocks the
inflammatoire
same
que les
inflammation
injections.
as the
En
injections.
psoriasis,
And
ça a fonctionné très
psoriasis,
bien.
it
Et
functioned
en fait,
very
il y a
well.
eu des études de
And there
phase
were
2,
studies
phase
of phase
3
2, phase 3
pour ce molécule-là.
for this
Et
molecule.
ça a fonctionné très bien.
And it
Dans
did
le
function very
colitis
well. And
ulcéreuse,
so in the ulcerative
on a
colitis,
déjà testé
we've
ça
already tested this
dans les études de phase
in
2.
these
Et
studies
les
of phase
résultats ont
2,
été
and the
positifs.
results
Ils n'ont
were
pas vu
positive. They did
des
not
problèmes
see
avec
any
l'iniquité.
problems
C'était une
with
molécule qui
inocuity.
était
It was a molecule
sécuritaire.
that was safe.
Et au même temps,
And at the same
ça a
time,
fonctionné très bien
it
chez
functioned
les
very
patients avec
well
colitis
with the
ulcéreuse.
patients with
Alors ça, c'est une autre option
ulcerative
intéressante, une
colitis. That's
comprimée
another
par
option
jour
that's interesting. One
avec un
pill a
profil
day
d'iniquité qui
with
était
inocuity
excellent.
profile that was excellent.
On fait les études de
We
phase
do these
3
studies of phase 3
aussi au CHUM
at the
avec ce
same
molécule-là
place at
en
the
janvier.
CHUM
Et
in
ça, c'est une
January,
autre
and this is another
option
option
potentielle pour les
that's
patients avec
potential
les
for
maladies inflammatoires.
clients with inflammatory
Ça
diseases.
s'appelle icotrokinra.
Icotrokinra.
Une autre molécule qui
Another
pourrait rentrer dans le
molecule that could
marché
enter onto the
d'ici
market
quelques ans, ça
in a
s'appelle
few
le
years is called
obefacimab. C'est
obefacimab.
un mécanisme
It is a
très
mechanism
compliqué,
that is very
mais bref,
complicated,
c'est une protéine
but
qui
briefly, it is a
agit sur
protein that acts
mRNA,
upon the
miRNA. Et en bref, c'est
miRNA,
comme
and
le
briefly,
ARN.
it is like
Et cet
RNA,
ARN
and
rentre
this
dans les cellules
RNA goes
et
into
ça
the cell
diminue
and
les
decreases
cellules à
the
sécréter
cells
des
that
cytokines qui
secrete
sont
cytokines that are inflammatory.
Il y a des données déjà de
There
phase
is
3
already data in phase
qui
3
a démontré que ça
that
fonctionne
have
très bien
demonstrated
dans
that
la
it works
colitis
very
ulcéreuse.
well
Alors,
in the
ça, c'est en fait,
colitis,
c'est
ulcerative colitis.
peut-être proche
And
d'être
so that's
sur le
probably
marché,
close to being
mais
on the
j'ai pas
market,
vu
but I have
encore
not
s'ils
seen
vont faire une
yet if
application
they're going to do an application
pour les agences régulatoires.
for the regulatory agencies.
Oh, excuse-moi. OK. Et dernièrement, j'ai parlé
And
beaucoup
lastly, I've spoken a lot
des molécules,
about
nouveaux
molecules,
molécules,
new
vieux
molecules, old
combinaisons des
molecules, the
molécules, mais il y a
combinations of
plus que
molecules.
ça,
But there's
que
more
en
than that.
2025, on est
In
en train d'apprendre
2025, we
qu'il
are
y a juste
learning
pas des drogues,
that
mais
it
il y
just
a
are not
aussi
just drugs, but
ce
they're
qu'on fait dans
also
la vie
what we
quotidienne.
do in everyday life.
Je veux mettre une bémol
So
ici
I would
que
put a
on
small
parle
note
de
on this, that we're
nutrition,
talking
on
about
parle de
nutrition, we're talking
microplastiques,
about the microplastics,
mais je dois dire que je
but I must
pense
say
pas que
that I don't think,
je pense que la nutrition
I
et
think
ce
that
qu'on met dans nos
nutrition
corps
and what we
est
put
très
in our body
important.
is very
Je pense
important.
pas qu'on
I
peut
don't
mettre une
think that we could
maladie
put a
active,
sickness
comme disons une 10
active
sur 10,
like a
en
10 on
rémission
10
avec
in
que du
remission
diète.
with
Mais est-ce
only
que
the
le diète
diet.
et ce
But
qu'on
what
met
the
dans
diet
notre
does
corps
and what we put in our
peut
body
aider
can help
à ou maintenir une
to
rémission ou
maintain
obtenir
in
une
remission
rémission
or
avec les
obtain a
drogues?
remission
Je
with
pense
drugs.
que oui.
I think so.
Alors, il y a des
And so
associations
there are
avec
associations
des nourritures
with
hautement transformées
food that are very highly
avec les
transformed
maladies
with
inflammatoires.
the inflammatory
Il y a
sickness,
des essais
and
cliniques
there are
qui
clinical
ont
trials
démontré
that have
une réduction
demonstrated a
dans
reduction
l'inflammation avec une
in
diète
inflammation with a
méditerranéenne.
diet, Mediterranean diet.
Et il y a beaucoup de données
And there are a lot
qui
of
démontrent
data
des
that
associations
show
avec les
associations with
microplastiques et
microplastics
les les maladies inflammatoires en
and
général. Ça, c'est
the
juste un article, mais il y en a
inflammatory
plusieurs qui démontrent qu'il y a
diseases
ces
as well. But there
associations.
are these
Est-ce que ça veut dire
associations.
que ça
Does that
cause,
mean that it causes
est-ce que ça cause la maladie
does it
inflammatoire ou est-ce
cause
que
an inflammatory
ou est-ce
disease,
que c'est un effet de la
or is an
maladie
effect
inflammatoire?
of the
On ne
inflammatory
sait pas.
diseases? We
Mais
don't know.
pour moi, pour mes
So for
patients,
me,
je
for my
dis,
patients,
on
I say
essaie
that we
de,
are
si
trying,
possible, le mieux
if
possible. On
possible
est des
and
êtres
best
humains, alors c'est
possible. We
pas,
are
on n'est pas
humans,
parfait.
so we're not
Mais
perfect.
je dis d'essayer de
But I say
manger
to
une
try
diète
to eat
méditerranéenne,
a
autant
Mediterranean diet
oméga
as
3,
much as
de
possible,
essayer
omega
le mieux
3s, and
possible
to try as much as
d'éviter
possible to
des choses qui
not
sont hautement
take anything that's
transformées. Alors,
highly
comment est-ce qu'on sait ça? Bon,
transformed.
si ça vient d'une
So if
usine,
it
c'est
comes from a
probablement
plant, it's
au moins
probably
transformé dans une façon.
transformed
Alors,
in
des
a
choses
way.
naturelles qui
So
viennent de la
natural
terre,
things that come
fruits,
from the
légumes,
earth, fruits and
poissons,
vegetables,
ce
fish
sont probablement les
are
meilleures choses.
probably the best
Euh,
things to consume.
et d'éviter les
And
plastiques le
to
plus possible, mais
not try to touch plastics in any
c'est
way possible.
impossible
But that is
maintenant, mais
impossible right now.
on essaie le mieux possible.
However, we're trying as much as possible.
Alors, avec ça, je vais vous
And so with this,
remercier
I will thank you
et
all
merci.
and thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Battat. So now I'll ask our CCC staff to take back slide control. But thank you, Dr. Battat, so much for sharing about up-and-coming treatments, emerging treatments. It's we actually got a question at the start about mRNA vaccines. So it was interesting that you touched on that towards the end. So now we will get into the, oh, yes. So before we proceed, we will launch the post poll to see how the scores have changed. So I will be launching that now. So that should show up on your screen. Just take about a few seconds to answer that. And then the question is, after the webinar, how would you rate your current knowledge on new and emerging therapies in IBD in Canada? So it's shifted towards the latter end of the spectrum, Dr. Battat. That's good to hear. Okay, a few more seconds. We'll try to get to 70%, 75% participation. Okay, so as you can see, it's good news. That means we've all learned a little bit more about IBD, new and emerging IBD treatments. We've moved towards the latter end of the spectrum. So thank you so much, Sophie and Dr. Battat, for sharing your insights today. Okay, this is great. Oh yes, Dr. Battat, do you have a question?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay, perfect. So now we will proceed to the Q&A portion of the webinar. So we have some questions that came in when individuals registered, and we also have Q&A questions that were submitted during the webinar. So we will try to get to as much as we can until 8:30. So we have plenty time, so this is great. Again, if you have any questions, please submit in the Q&A box found in the Zoom menu bar. I do want to share that we do not answer questions related to very specific medical situations. So specifically, if it's your personal health information, we won't ask those questions. So if you do ask them, please ask in a more generalized fashion. Okay, so we'll first go over the questions that were submitted, and then we'll go over the Q&A chat box that came up during the webinar. So Dr. Battat, the first question is, what new drugs are currently being researched, particularly those related to diet and nutrition?
So I guess there's a few. So I think I had gone over, one study where they looked at a specific Crohn's related diet, the CDED, compared it to the Mediterranean diet. And so they showed that both diets helped in reduce some of the intestinal inflammation. There's no randomized trial where they're using diet and a new drug at the same time, to my knowledge. And the reason is because regulatory authorities want to see the effect of the drug itself to be able to approve it and not attribute it to something else. That being said, there's a lot of association data to say that using highly processed food is associated with, um, IBD, microplastics as well. It's not to say it's cause effect, but if you can avoid them, it's good for your overall health. Um, and then there isn't a clinical trial. I mean, if this has to do with nutrition, I'm not sure, but where they're using GLP-1 and mirikizumab. So it's the same company, Eli Lilly, that makes both.
Mm.
And so they're trying a GLP-1 with an IL-23 drug at the same time, thinking that one that acts more on your metabolic health may help on your autoimmune inflammation.
Okay, cool. That makes
Yeah.
sense. The next question is, what medications are recommended for pain management in IBD patients that are safer than acetaminophen?
It's a great question, and one that I think even many IBD providers are sometimes uncomfortable with. Um, I I think that a lot is said about Advil being, or non-steroidal anti-inflammatories like Advil, Motrin, Aleve, naproxen, all of those being bad for inflammatory bowel disease. Um, and I think that's probably, accurate. They're not poison, but it's probably not good to take them chronically if you have inflammatory bowel disease, um, because they cause ulcers of your intestine. And in Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, you get ulcers in your intestines. So it would, not be good to have something that makes ulcers in your intestine.
Of course.
That being said, there is a type of NSAID, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, called COX-2 inhibitors. So like Celebrex, for instance, or celecoxib is the generic name, which they've actually done studies and they've shown that if you give that drug or a placebo and then actually do a video capsule, so meaning
Mm.
like it's a camera that goes all through your large and small intestine, they don't see any more ulcerations with that drug than they did with a placebo. And
Mm.
so, if I have a patient who's needing some sort of relief, headache, sometimes joint pains, that's an option that I think is reasonable. And they haven't seen much increase in flares with that either in terms of IBD. Um, One drug I really do try to avoid are opioids, or one class. Those are a drug class. So opioids, Dilaudid, hydromorphone, morphine, and those are drugs that are associated actually with mortality, higher risk of death in patients with IBD. So I don't ever prescribe those, and I try to make sure that my IBD patients aren't on them.
So the COX inhibitors they work on a different mechanism than Advil and
Yeah, they work similar but different. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Okay. Okay. Oh, this question seems to have cut off, but when I received the question, it was, can you briefly describe the process and timeline for how we get new IBD medications? So I think they're talking about the clinical trials
Yeah.
process.
So you first have to, uh, like in a test tube, or show that this, a molecule blocks something that has been shown to be some inflammatory pathway that's been shown to be associated with inflammatory bowel disease. And that could take a few years, just, someone working in a lab with a master's or PhD student. And then once you've done that, you have to then create a drug that would target that. And then once you've done that, you have to then make sure that it won't hurt anyone. So the first is always do no harm. And so there's something called a phase 1 study where they tried in healthy people, like a handful, but just to be sure that there's no signal for any safety concerns. That could take at least over a year or two.
Mm.
Um, And then you do a phase 2 study where you have to actually find the right dose of that. So you actually have patients with the disease, so Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, and they do what's called a dose finding. So they kind of give the same drug in like 5 different doses or 4 different doses, and then they have a patient arm with placebo. They're still evaluating safety, obviously, but they're also evaluating the efficacy and if there's a drug dose that works. This is a critical phase because you risk also not finding the right dose. There are certain phase 2 studies where you see that, the lowest dose is the weakest, and then dose 2 is the second weakest, and then dose 3 is a little bit stronger, and dose 4 is even stronger. But who knows if they had selected dose 5, it may have been really much better. And so they really have to do a lot of research as to what they think is going to be the right dose for this, for, not to make sure they're underdosing a drug and wasting that mechanism. And then after they've done that study, then with the dose that works best and obviously is safe, um, they go to a phase 3 program, which takes another couple of years, like 3 to 4 years. And then they have to apply to a regulatory agency like FDA or Health Canada, which takes another 1.5 years. And then they have to apply to well, I don't know if it's going to be called INES and CADIT anymore, but to the payers who would then approve that it's on formulary, that the government and or insurance companies cover it. So it's like, it could be a 20-year journey sometimes from test tube to human being to being on the market.
Yeah. It's a long process.
Yeah.
Okay. The next question was, is there a known link between, I guess this is less related to IBD treatments, but a question that came in. Is there a known link between Crohn's disease, ankylosing spondylitis, and psoriasis?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, in short, yes, there is. They cluster together. Often families, people have, them or some of the patients may have this 3 of those diseases at the same time. Fortunately, a lot of the drugs often work for many of them. So these IL-23 medicines work for psoriasis and IBD, anti-TNF like infliximab and Rinvoq, which is a JAK inhibitor, work for all of them. They work for psoriasis, they work for ANKSPON, they work for ankylosing spondylitis, and for IBD. So fortunately, we can sometimes kill 2 birds with one stone.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Are there any new treatments or advanced? Yes.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Are there any new treatments or advances specifically targeting symptom management? So I will say a lot of the questions we got, I tried to group them, but they were related to if there was improvements in symptom management versus like treating IBD specifically.
Right. Yeah. So I think this is a major point is that, I always tell my patients, I think your symptoms are important. Um, and the main target of therapies is to heal the organ. So the analogy would be a mass in your breast, for instance. You may not feel it, but we all want to get rid of that, right? And so, because the disease of the organ is what we want to eliminate, and we have good data to say that if we do that, so if we heal the organ in the long term, not day to day, like thinking of it like a stock market, but we're talking about over 10 years, the overall quality of life, the amount of hospitalizations, the amount of surgeries is reduced. So that is the main treatment target, is to heal the organ. And with that, most patients feel better. There are a subset of patients that either, and by the way, it could be either way. So there's a bunch of patients who are in endoscopic remission, so their colons are perfect, their small intestines are perfect, and they have abdominal pain, or they have diarrhea, or they have fatigue. Vice versa, there's tons of patients who have horribly inflamed colons or in small intestines, and they have no symptoms whatsoever. So there's not a one-to-one link. we also have 18 organs in our abdomen. And so there's a lot that can go wrong. And it's like, I think it's psychologically uh, based on often trauma that has happened in a patient's life that when you get pain in your abdomen, your mind goes straight to it's IBD. But many people in the world get, transient abdominal pain, diarrhea. If you've had your gallbladder out, you could have bile acid diarrhea and be in remission from your Crohn's, but be having diarrhea. So there has to not also be tunnel vision. And I try to say, like, have a wide differential diagnosis for my patient's symptoms so that I don't just say, well, the Crohn's is good, it must be nothing, but actually that there may be other causes that I'm going to investigate as to why this patient has their symptoms.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's more of a more global, can we say, view of managing IBD versus just IBD itself. Oh, okay. So this is also, I guess we answered this a little bit, which was, so I will skip on to the next question. So this was a question we had, which was, which newer IBD therapies offer a lower risk profile for infection and malignancies compared to older treatments?
Yeah, so I think I touched on that as well. I think the IL, so these newer ones so I think, Entyvio, Stelara, Tremfya, Omvo, Skyrizi, probably etrasimod, which was one of those S1Ps. Those are probably pretty darn safe. I think that anti-TNFs like infliximab, azathioprine, or 6-MP like pyrinosol, those medicines had measurable risks, but we're still talking about fractions of percentages of patients who have been taking the drug for a long time. So I don't want people to come away thinking that, Remicade or infliximab was a dangerous drug. It's not. It's a really good drug. I still use it, and the risks are low, but not zero. And in terms of, there's Rinvoq also is a medicine that works very well for IBD. It does carry small risks that are measurable but low. I do also tell my IBD patients that globally, if you're hospitalized every month because your IBD is out of control, your risk of infection is higher than if you were on Rinvoq and feeling perfect and never showing up to the hospital, right? There's stuff that goes around. There's C. difficile, there's flu, there's COVID, there's whatever. And so, if you have a surgery, you can have a surgical site infection. So it's not to say that those things happen, but there's risks. And I think that if you're in remission, whatever drug works to get you in remission is probably makes you globally healthier.
Yeah. Like there's too many ways to get an infection, so you can't necessarily attribute it to just from side effects of medication.
Right. And you can be on Entyvio, which is really safe, and then send your kid to daycare and get gastro. Right. And so that's
Yeah, it's a lot of confounding factors.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is stem cell therapy currently being investigated as a potential treatment for IBD?
So there's been studies that have shown mixed results, particularly with injection of stem cells into perianal fistulas. So they try to inject stem cells to try to close it up. One study in Europe was quite positive and it showed it helped. But then they did a North American study that showed that it doesn't really work much better than if you just really clean out the fistulas surgically. And so it didn't work much better than a placebo. And so for that reason, it probably won't be an emerging therapy for IBD if we're talking about injected stem cells like that. Yeah.
Were these stem cells from the patient themselves, or I guess how
They're
are
from the
they?
fat, from fat. Yeah. I see a couple of questions. Maybe I'm just going to take a couple of questions from the chat
Of course.
that were being sent.
Yeah.
Dr. Battat, est-ce que les nouveaux médicaments qui
Dr.
visent
Battat,
IL-23, JAK1
the
sont
new
aussi
drugs,
efficaces lorsque
the
on a
IL-23 and
des
JAK1, are
fistules
they
et
efficient
aussi
when
des
we have
manifestations
fistules
extra-intestinales telles
and
que l'arthrite
extraintestinal
inflammatoire?
manifestations as inflammatory
Alors,
arthritis?
les IL, alors, on va parler des JAK parce que
So we'll talk about the
les
JAK,
inhibiteurs de JAK1, comme les
because
upadacitinib,
JAK1
traitent presque
inhibitors
tout.
like
Ça
faricimab,
traite
like they
l'inflammation dans le
treat
corps.
almost
Alors,
everything. They
ça
treat
traite
inflammation in
l'arthrite
general in the
et c'est
body.
approuvé pour
It treats
plusieurs
arthritis. It was
indications
approved for many
rhumatologiques.
rheumatological
Il y a des
indications.
données, pas des
There
essais
is
cliniques ciblés
data,
pour les
not
fistules. Il
targeted
y a des données
clinical trials
encourageant
for
que ça pourrait
fistulas,
fonctionner pour les
but there is
fistules aussi.
encouraging data that shows that it
Pour
might
les
work for
IL-23,
fistulas
ça
as well.
fonctionne pas
For
vraiment pour
IL-23s, it doesn't really work for
spondyloarthrite ankylosante,
the
mais ça fonctionne pour le psoriasis et
burdensome
le arthrite
spondyloarthritis, but it
psoriatique
does
aussi.
work for psoriasis and
L'autre, pour les fistules, il y a un essai clinique pour
psoriasis
le
arthritis as
Tremfya,
well.
le
So there is also
guselkumab,
the Tremfya, the glycelkumab.
pour voir si ça fonctionne
They're doing clinical
particulièrement chez les
trials to
patients avec
see if
Crohn
it
avec fistules. Les
particularly
données vont
works for
sortir cet hiver.
Crohn's patients with fistula. So data will be published this winter time.
Prochaine question,
Next question.
Est-ce qu'il y a une gradation dans l'ordre des médicaments?
Is there
Est-ce
a
qu'on utilise
gradient
pyranitol
in
toujours?
the order of
Moi, je prescris pas
medications?
le
Do we always use
pyranitol
pyranitol?
comme un
I
traitement
don't
seul.
prescribe pyranitol as
Des
a
fois, je
standalone
l'ajoute à des
treatment.
agents comme
Sometimes I add
l'infliximab
it on top of
ou
other agents like
adalimumab, comme les anti-TNF,
infliximab and
pour
adalimumab,
augmenter
the
leur efficacité
anti-TNFs, to
basé sur des données.
promote their
Mais je
efficiency
ne l'utilise pas comme en
based on data,
monothérapie en
but I don't
2025.
use that drug
Mais
as
il
a
y en a beaucoup de
monotherapy
patients
in
qui sont en rémission
2025.
sur ce
But a
traitement-là.
lot of
Et c'est
patients
sûr,
are on
si c'est pas
remission
brisé,
with that
j'essaie pas
treatment. So if
de
it's
le
still
réparer.
working, I don't try to fix it.
Point de vue des gradations,
In terms of
j'ai donné
gradients,
comme hiérarchie des
I
efficacités.
gave you my
Je pense que
hierarchy
ça
of
dépend sur la
efficiencies.
sévérité
I think
et le
it's
profil
a question
global
of
du patient, comme
severity and the
s'ils ont
global profile of the
des
patient,
comorbidités ou des choses comme
if
ça.
they
Mais
have
je dois dire que
comorbidity or things
tous
like
les
that.
traitements sont
I
efficaces
should say that all
et en
treatments
fait,
are efficient,
on est chanceux
and
qu'il
actually
y
we're
a ces
lucky
traitements-là.
to have those
Euh,
treatments
Une
available.
autre, concernant le vedolizumab, est-ce que
Another question about the visidilizumab.
que j'ai entendu bien que quelqu'un qui prend Entyvio n'est pas
If
immunosupprimé?
someone takes Entyvio, they are not
Est-ce que ça veut dire
immunosuppressed. Does that
est-ce que
mean
cela veut dire que quelqu'un sous Entyvio
does that
peut
mean that
se
someone
faire
using
vacciner avec
Entyvio
alors
can get a vaccination?
avec des vaccins vivants? Est-ce qu'on peut prendre des vaccins vivants
Vaccinated,
avec
but with
l'Entyvio?
living
Par une
vaccines
abondance de précautions, on ne les
to
donne pas
be
et c'est
abundantly
contre-indiqué.
careful. We don't give that, and it's
Ça, c'est
not
basé,
indicated.
c'est comme une habitude
It's not
qu'on a
encouraged.
pris
It's a habit that we took
à cause de les médicaments qu'on prescrivait avant.
because of medications that we
S'il
used
y
to
en a des patients
prescribe.
qui ont besoin des vaccins
If
vivants sur
patients
Entyvio,
need living
j'envoie à mes collègues
vaccines and they're on
les
Entyvio,
infectiologues
I send them
pour
over to my
demander les
colleagues,
questions
the
chaque fois.
infectiologists,
En
and I
fait,
ask
il y
the
en a eu
question every
quelques-uns qui
time.
ont eu sans
A
problème.
few were able to get the vaccine without any issues.
So another one is, are these medicines for pediatric and adult, specifically with respect to ulcerative colitis? So this is a really important point that a lot of us have been pushing the companies to try to trial these drugs out in kids, because kids need new drugs too. Right now, the only drugs that are actually approved for pediatrics are the anti-TNFs. That being said, there's a lot of data saying that, ustekinumab like Stelara works quite well. Entyvio works quite well in kids, but they didn't go through that formal trial process. That being said, now more and more, at least most trials are including 16-year-olds, and even now we're pushing down to, I believe the guselkumab program is doing a pediatric version in children as young as 6. And so this is something that's, in my opinion, quite encouraging, because if it can get approved, a safe agent getting approved in pediatrics, that would be very, very helpful for families. So more and more, I think drugs are going to be trialed in pediatrics. Another question is, if you start your treatment plan with Remicade, is there an opportunity in the future to go off of it for a less immunosuppressant drug, or would that be detrimental? Yeah, so it's so if you stop in infliximab, so Remicade, and then you restart it, there's a chance that your body rejects it. We know that if you stop infliximab and you go on nothing, about 70% of patients will recur within a year. So we don't recommend going off drug, without anything. There are cases where we need to switch, and if something's working, there's always the risk of of an unknown, that if you switch to another medicine, it may not work, but it may work too. So, but there's a little bit of a gamble in that. And so I generally, if a drug is working for those patients, I continue it unless there's a reason to change it, right? So if it's causing you to get repeated infections, or you have some adverse reaction to the administration of it, or so on and so forth, then I say, okay, well, let's try something else, because right now your quality has gone down because of the side effects. I don't know, Roshan, if you had any more questions.
Yeah, there's some in the that were sent over. Let's see.
I can just keep reading through them if you want.
Yeah, sure, please go ahead. If you're okay to go until 8:30, that's okay.
Sure.
Perfectly.
Dr. Battat, est-ce que les nouveaux médicaments... oh no, wait. That was
Dr.
already
Battat?
asked. Sorry, wait, I think I got... Yeah, okay, so so someone's asking a question about Chinese hamster ovaries, and what is the chance that a virus could transfer over from the Chinese hamster ovaries, other than it is highly unlikely. So it's a good question. So just to update why Chinese hamster, because these Chinese hamster ovaries, or we say CHO, are part of the manufacturing process of most biologic drugs. So when I say biologic drugs, what I mean is that's a manufacturing process. So like that's like saying something is it's a horrible name, biologic, but it's like saying something is like kosher or halal. You can have a kosher salad, or you can have kosher French fries. It doesn't mean that one is health. That kosher really has any implication for your health. So biologic also is a term that just means the manufacturing process. So the manufacturing process is that for these protein-based drugs, and that's the injectables, really. It's really just the injectables that we're talking about. So we're talking about the anti-TNFs, the Entyvio, the Stelara, and the IL-23s, not for the oral medicines at all. This does not apply to them. Chinese hamster ovaries are part of the process that help the cells secrete the protein, which is the drug that we administer. But when so they're saying, well, if there's viruses in the Chinese hamster ovaries, can they be transferred over to us? The answer is no, but I'll explain in more detail why. Because what we're actually giving is not, so like a virus needs something to live in, and what is being administered to us is not anything living, it's a protein. So it's like saying, like, like you have, you're being injected with just the protein. A virus cannot live in that protein. So when the drug is, or the protein, which is an antibody, is isolated, just the antibody is taken out of the mixture, and then it's suspended separately in a solution, and then it's administered to us. So it would be impossible for a virus to live in a medium where there's no cells for it to live. It would die immediately. So no, the answer is no. But thank you for the question. Um, but I think that was more than just very, highly unlikely. It's a more scientifically based answer. So I hope that's appreciated. Do these drugs reduce the size of an existing stricture? I think for me, so in patients with Crohn's, you can get, the inflammation can cause scarring of the intestine, which can then narrow the lumen, meaning like make the tube more narrow. And that could cause blockages. I think there's, stricture is it's a wide term, let's say. So there could be strictures where, it's a pinpoint, and if you were to have a nut that would fall on it, it would block it completely. And I don't think, when you're about to occlude, I don't think that a biologic drug is going to really open it up to a meaningful level. And I think that's where surgery or some sort of mechanical solution is needed, like dilation or something like that. Sorry, just the mic is on for someone on Crohn's and Colitis Canada.
Oh,
And and but the but for strictures that are not so tight, there are studies that show that if giving drugs could help. Yeah. Parmi les trois inhibiteurs de IL-23,
In the three inhibitors,
ils
IL-23,
démontrent
it
tous les trois
shows
la
all
même
three
efficacité
the
pour le
same
Crohn.
efficiency for Crohn,
Sinon,
or
lequel est
else
le plus
which
efficace
one
pour le
is
Crohn?
more efficient for Crohn?
Grosso modo, je pense que la
Well, in
réponse est
general, I think
qu'ils
that the
sont
answer would be that
probablement
they're
tous
probably
similaires.
all similar.
Ils fonctionnent tous
They
beaucoup
function
mieux
all
que
a lot
un
better.
placebo. Et, sorry, Rochelle, Crohn's and Colitis
Crohn et
Canada is,
Colite
not muted. That's
Canada
right.
n'est
Okay.
pas en sourdine, c'est ça.
So now they are. Alors, les trois inhibiteurs
So the
sont
three inhibitors
grosso modo le même.
are pretty much
Il
the
y a
same.
des données, on dit les
There
données
is
tête à tête
data
versus le
head-to-head
Stelara,
versus
le
Stelara,
ustekinumab,
is
et le
ustekinumab, and
risankizumab
the
et le gusakimab
incusumab,
étaient
and
mieux que
that was
le
better
ustekinumab.
than
Alors, le
ustekinumab,
Tremfya
and
et
so
le
the
Skyrizi
Tremfya
fonctionnaient mieux que le
was
Stelara.
working better than Stelara.
Le Envo, le
But Onvo,
mirikizumab, n'a pas fonctionné
incusumab,
mieux
did
que
not
le
function better
ustekinumab,
than
mais,
ustekinumab.
mais c'est je pense, quelque
But I
chose
think that
dans
it
le
is
design de l'essai
something in
clinique
the
et pas dans
design of the clinical
l'efficacité du
trial, not the
drug. Je
inefficiency
vais
of
te
the
dire la
drug.
raison. Le taux de
I'll say the
rémission
reason, the remission
couramment était
rate
entre à peu près
was
48%
between
pour
48%.
Tremfya,
For
Skyrizi
Tremfya,
et Envo, c'est
Scaricine, and Vo
48%.
was
Mais dans l'essai
48%.
clinique
In the
de
clinical
Envo,
trials
de
of Onvo,
mirikizumab, le
mirikizumab,
ustekinumab a juste fonctionné
istekimab
mieux.
just functioned
Alors,
better.
c'est pour ça que
And so for
ça
that
n'a pas démontré une
reason, that
différence.
did
Mais
not
pour
show a
moi,
difference. But for
les trois
me,
options
the
fonctionnent
three
de même.
options are functioning the same.
So strictures.
Des strictures.
I'm just looking for more. How soon after beginning a new medication should you expect to see improvement? I would say we want to start to feel better on a period of, weeks. Better doesn't mean perfect. It just means like it could be I was at a 8 on 9, 8 on 10, at the beginning, and now, 6 weeks later, even if I'm a 6 or a 7 on 10, but I'm heading in the right direction, we may be tempted, especially in patients who've medicines have failed them many times, we may be tempted to say, well, let's just continue a little bit more and see if that trend continues or you plateau. I think if we keep seeing continued improvement, some patients are faster and we may see it even on the days span, and other patients take up to 6 months. I generally say, though, after about 6 and maximally 12 months, if a patient hasn't even if their plateau is not where we want it to be, then we switch. I would also say that we don't want to wait too long. And there's patients that if they're very severe or they've seen zero change over a span of, say, 3 months, I may be tempted to say that that's what we call a primary non-response, and we would be tempted to switch earlier. Est-ce que tous les gastroentérologues du Canada
do all gastroenterologists in Canada and Quebec were informed on the new molecules and medication?
C'est une question difficile à répondre.
It's a difficult question to answer. We try to do programs, educational programs for the whole year. There are courses for gastroenterologists and inflammatory diseases. There's a whole day in April for by different associations of the gastroenterologists of Quebec in April. And at the CHUM, we also have a day that just started on the 17th of November, where we try to give education on all these things for gastroenterologists. So I would like to say yes, but obviously, I can't guarantee it's 100%. But I think that most.
I'm trying to see if there are questions that we haven't gotten to.
Alors, il y a une question. Est-ce qu'il y a une combinaison
So there was a question, is there a combination as useful as infliximab, but more secure?
Je peux deviner
I can guess based on data.
So
we can guess in a way, educated guess. However, there is not like to answer to that legally. We need to say that we need to have data, phase 3, and then clinical trials to say that is this risk with registers as well for years. But if we use a bit of common sense, if we have a medication that's more secure than azathioprine, like Entyvio, why would it be more dangerous to combine with infliximab than azathioprine? And so, in theory, I think that these types of combinations, or even infliximab or the IL-23, are more secure than azathioprine. We know that already. So why is it more dangerous to combine them together? And with infliximab, in theory, it should not be that way. But that's in theory, and that's not a fact. So we need to do those trials and those studies to be sure, 100% sure, because for us as doctors, our first job is not to hurt the patient.
Dr. Battat, one question that came in was, if you take a peptide pill, would there be less of a chance your immune system would create antibodies, I guess, against the pill versus to biologics?
Yes, less of a chance. In fact, almost no chance. No chance in any meaningful way. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bunch of questions in French, which I will share with you. So I will send it to you. Okay. It's a big one.
Sorry. One is just before the last one. Is surgery inevitable? It seems like these drugs are made to be switched eventually. um, I don't know if I agree with the statement, but I think it's worth addressing, and maybe I'm choosing some controversial statements. Um, I think that durability is something that's very important. The anti-TNFs had an issue with durability. You have to remember that we also didn't have, we went from 1998 till 2013 without any new classes of drug. That's nearly 20 years. And those drugs did have durability issues. We do know, though, that with the newer medicines, because we don't develop antibodies to them, when we actually achieve a full remission, like endoscopic, so the colon and the intestine are healed and the patient has no symptoms, the chance that that drug will stop working is very low. And so I would say that surgery is not inevitable for everyone. That being said, surgery is also an option. And surgery is a good therapeutic option for excuse me, sorry. So surgery is an option that is good for some patients. There's some patients who get one surgery and then for the rest of their life, the Crohn's never comes back. And so surgery is not a failure, it's one of our options. And then the last question, okay, so la question c'est sur le
Okay, the
système
question is on the system,
immunitaire
immune system
du, du bébé. En fait,
of
si
the
une
baby.
maman
So if
prend
a mother
Remicade
takes Remicade
et, elle allaite le bébé,
and she's milking
est-ce
the
que
baby,
le bébé est
does
impacté
the
par
baby is the
l'allaitement?
baby
Euh,
impacted by the
Bref, la
milking?
réponse, c'est
So
non.
the answer is no. Or the
Une maman
breastfeeding, if it's
qui
an issue when the baby is breastfeeding. So
veut allaiter
if the mother wants to
son
breastfeed the
bébé
baby or her,
peut allaiter sur le
she can
Remicade.
breastfeed
Il y
on
en a quelques
Remicade,
médicaments
and
qui
there are
ne
some
sont pas
medications
permis.
that are not permitted,
D'habitude, ce sont
and
les
usually
médicaments
it is the medication
qui sont pris
that
en comprimé.
are taken as a
Mais
pill.
C'est pas interdit de faire ça
But it's
et
not
le bébé va pas être
contraindicated,
immunosupprimé
so
si
the baby will not be
prend le lait de maman.
immunosuppressed if they take the mother's milk.
Alors, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Battat. That was, I think, one of the longest Q&A sessions we've had. So thank you so much for taking the time to answer everyone's questions. We will now wrap up the set webinar for tonight. So if Sophie could come on too, because I'd like to just thank her very quickly. So again, thank you, Dr. Battat, and thank you, Sophie, so much for attending today. And then Sophie for sharing your lived experience and Dr. Battat for sharing your expertise. Sophie, I want to share that there were a lot of thank yous and acknowledgement of shared experience in the chat, which I would like to share with you.
I read them all. Rochelle, I just want to say thank you to everyone who expressed their thank yous. It was my pleasure. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll say it right back at you. Before we wrap up, I want to say thank you to everyone for joining again today. This will be the last webinar series webinar for 2025, and we will restart again in 2026. I want to say that this webinar was supported by grants from Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, AbbVie, Takeda, and Merck. And if you have any questions, looking for support, please email us at learn@crohnsandcolitis.ca. Last, as you leave this webinar, there will be a pop-up notification asking if you would like to take part in a feedback survey. That's for us, again, to improve our programming and to make sure that we provide the best webinar service that we can. So please take a few seconds to answer that if you can. And lastly, you can follow us on all of our social media handles, Gutsy Canada, and we constantly share updates and we promote different events and programs that we're launching and on these platforms. So again, I'd like to wish everyone happy holidays. Wherever you are, I hope you have a healthy and warm holiday, even if it gets cold. Thank you again to everyone for attending tonight. I'd also like to thank all the CCC staff in the background that was helping us, answering questions, managing slides, also our interpreters, Caroline and Mike, for doing a great job, especially this webinar, we were jumping back and forth. And so we really appreciate your agility in the translation. And again, lastly, Dr. Battat, thank you again for attending. Also, I will say Dr. Battat recently won the Rising Star Award for his research and his expertise and his accomplishments in this IBD space as an up-and-coming researcher. So congrats again, Dr. Battat. And we'll see everyone next year. So have a wonderful night, everyone. Good night.
Yeah.
Bye, Dr. Battat. Bye, Sophie.